Rapid onset gender dysphoria. I made a video on my main channel talking about this because it's an interesting debate. And there was this fiasco over a study published by Brown, which is being highlighted here by the Federalist, that said that a lot of this transgender stuff that we're seeing among primarily young women is actually a trend, and it's the result of peer pressure and online forums and things like that. Now, I want to mention first and foremost, the Federalist is a conservative outlet. And I'm going to be reading this woman who is addressing the study and making an argument as to why it's true, but I want to point out it is biased. From people in the trans community, they've said the reason we're seeing more trans people come out is simple. It's accepted. The public is more accepting of it, so people feel safe. And because they feel safe, they're more willing to come out and speak about the things that they need, the things they feel. And I believe that is absolutely true. I don't think it explains everything, and I believe it is possible there is such a thing as rapid onset gender dysphoria, that it is a trend in some circumstances. But I do think that we're seeing a lot of people willing to come out and speak up about how they feel because it's becoming safer for them to do so. It's becoming accepted. That being said, this is going to be a conservative view, and then I've got this other thing I want to show. But first, we're going to start with this article and the arguments they make. So, rapid onset gender dysphoria among teens and young adults may be a social contagion linked with having friends who identify as LGBT, and identity politics, peer culture, and an increase in internet use. Finds a study out this month from a Brown University professor. The study was quickly yanked from Brown's news releases after a transgender activist feeding frenzy, and the journal it was published in is reconsidering the publication. There is a parent and research-driven petition to stand behind the publication of the first study to look into detail at rapid onset gender dysphoria. I want to point out something really important. Just because rapid onset gender dysphoria exists, presuming it does, doesn't mean that the overwhelming majority of people who are trans are doing it because it's trendy. All this means is that if it does exist, then there may be a certain amount of people who are trans because of a trend. But it might be 10 people, it might be 100 people. Right? This is a phenomenon that I think is, as it pertains to science, worth looking into. But it's also important to be skeptical. And anyone who understands science knows that science evolves and changes as we learn more. Here's my take on this study. We should read it, yes. We should understand it, yes. We should continue to research, yes. Should we dismiss the experiences of trans people? Absolutely not. If someone is claiming to experience these things, they should be treated as such, and we shouldn't assume that everybody who is trans is simply doing it because of a trend. It might be less than 1%, it might be 50%, who knows? The point is, we should respect the individual and not hold them back in any way, or discredit them, or insult them simply because we've got one study so far. We should try to better understand what's going on, and try to figure out how to better treat those who are experiencing these symptoms, plain and simple. But now, let's move on. The petition includes the following graph about gender referrals in the United Kingdom, anecdotal and news reports, as well as rapid recent growth in transgender treatment centers indicates a similar phenomenon inside the United States. So we can see the annual referrals, I guess is relating to people who are, being found to be gender dysphoric. We can see that 69% are female. There's 1,400 girls and 616 boys. The parental reports in the study offer important and much-needed preliminary information about a cohort of adolescents, mostly girls, who, with no prior history of dysphoria, are requesting irreversible medical interventions, including the potential to impair fertility and future sexual function, says the petition. In any other group of children, these grave consequences would be seen as human rights violations unless there was significant and overwhelming evidence these procedures would be beneficial long-term. Despite these facts on the ground, Brown issued a statement Tuesday effectively apologizing for publishing their own professor's research because Brown community members expressed concerns that the conclusions of the study could be used to discredit efforts to support transgender youth and invalidate the perspectives of members of the transgender community. Now, here's the thing. That's true. This study could be used to do that. But that's still no argument to remove the study. And it is worrisome to me if, for political reasons, we are going to take down scientific research studies. Look, the cure for bad science is more science. The cure for bad speech is more speech. Discredit it. Prove to everyone it's not real if you think it's not. Do the research, okay? So I'm not going to read about their statement because I did another video, but let's talk about how the study came about. There's actually a bunch of really scary stuff if this study is true. The study is authored by Lisa Littman, a behavior and social science professor at Brown, and an OBGYN whose publications are mainly in reproductive health and abortion. Here's the phenomenon that caused her to conduct the study to learn more. Parents have described clusters of gender dysphoria outbreaks occurring in pre-existing friend groups, with multiple or even all members of a friend group becoming gender dysphoric and transgender identified in a pattern that seems statistically unlikely based on previous research. Parents describe a process of immersion in social media, such as binge-watching YouTube transition videos and excessive use of Tumblr, immediately preceding their child becoming gender dysphoric. These descriptions are atypical for the presentation of gender dysphoria described in the research literature. So there's a good criticism that people have. I don't think it's valid. I think it's good criticism. It's important, an important issue to bring up, but I think it can be refuted. So they say that Littman recruited for the study by posting on transgender critical websites, Fourth Wave Now, Transgender Trend, and Youth Trans Critical Professionals, seeking parents of adolescents who had quickly come out as transgender. The criticism is that she sought opinions from people who already believed it was a trend. However, that doesn't discredit the study. The point was, the researcher was trying to find parents who were experiencing this phenomenon, who thought this was the case, to see why they thought so. And an important thing is that she surveyed the parents on questions that would be used to describe actual gender dysphoria. So the criteria for if someone's actually gender dysphoric. She recruited 256 parents with children ages 11 to 27. They filled out a 90-question survey that took about 30 to 60 minutes to complete. 80% of their transgender identifying children were female, and on average, the kids came out at age 15. See why this is important is that you've got parents who think this is happening, so they do the survey. And what they found is that a decent amount of these parents, 80%, had female children. That's great data. That's fantastic. Doesn't mean we can make any conclusions, not really, but we now know that a lot of the parents who feel this way have female children. Maybe that's a factor, but we can do more research. It's great. While the author and any social scientist will tell you the study design has many flaws, self-selection and self-reporting among them, it is comparable in quality to the studies that LGBT activists amplify when it serves their narratives. For example, a recent study that found kids of lesbians had outcomes as good or better than that of married biological parents also had self-selected participants who self-reported outcomes. Even though that had only 1/4 the sample size of Littman's study, it was widely celebrated and published about in prominent outlets. So this is actually really interesting. Littman found a number of things that make transgender narratives look terrible. For example, she explored the horrifyingly irresponsible lies anonymous internet users frequently offer to confused kids who were apparently free to browse for this information online. The below graph from the study quotes common advice transgender activists gave children over these kinds of forums. So they gave instructions on how to lie. Find out what they want to hear if they're going to give you tea, and then tell them just that. It's about getting treatment, not about being true to those around you. It's not their business, and a lot of the time doctors will screw stuff up for you. Now, I don't know how frequent, right? They cite a bunch of Reddit posts from Ask Transgender, and I'd be curious as how often this advice appears, because for one thing, I would say this is terrible advice, but if it's one comment from one person, it's not indicative of anything. I will say, though, if it is true that this is common, it's terrifying because we want to tell kids, listen, the people around you love you and want you to feel good, and they want to make sure you're healthy and safe. Tell them everything, and they will do what's best for you. They're not, like, your parents aren't going to lie to you because they hate you, because they want to hurt you. They're trying to protect you, okay? Get a story ready in your head, and as suggested, keep the lie to a minimum and only for stuff that can't be verified, like how you were feeling, but was too afraid to tell anyone, including your family. I'd also look up the DSM for the diagnostic criteria for transgender and make sure your story fits it, assuming your psych follow it. That's terrifying. Telling people how to lie to make it seem like they are transgender. That's urgency to transition. If you don't do it when you're young, you'll be miserable and unhappy with your body for the rest of your life. And then, what is this? Vague and non-specific symptoms called signs of gender dysphoria. Continual difficulty with simply getting through the day, a sense of misalignment, disconnect, or estrangement from your own emotions, a feeling of just going through the motions in everyday life, as if you're always reading from a script, a seeming pointlessness to your life, and no sense of any real meaning or ultimate purpose, knowing you're somehow different from everyone else and wishing you could be normal like them. None of those are gender dysphoria. So there's a couple other interesting things I want to point out. I don't want to go on too long, but This one's interesting. It says, high correlation to peers who promote LGBT sexuality. The story includes other eye-opening information, such as case studies of several children's stories. Here are three. A 14-year-old natal female and three of her natal female friends who were taking group lessons together with a very popular coach. The coach came out as transgender, and within 1 year, all 4 students announced they were also transgender. A 21-year-old natal male who had been academically successful at a prestigious university seemed depressed for about 6 months. Since concluding that he was transgender, he went on to have a marked decline in his social functioning and has become increasingly angry and hostile to his family. He refuses to move out or look for a job. His entire family, including several members who are very supportive of the transgender community, believe that he's suffering from a mental disorder which has nothing to do with gender. This, I don't think, sounds like it's rapid onset gender dysphoria. This sounds like someone who might actually be transgender. A 14-year-old natal female and 3 of her friends who are part of a larger friend group that spends much of their time talking about gender and sexuality. The 3 natal female friends all announced they were trans boys and chose similar masculine names. After spending time with these 3 friends, the 14-year-old natal female announced that she was also a trans boy. And so the study also describes links between social acceptance and even obsession with alternative sexuality as being a high risk factor for children contracting gender dysphoria. So I'm not gonna read on too much longer because I want to make a few points. For one, contracting gender dysphoria. This is an obvious, conservative study, and naturally, people who are conservative, look, they're obviously biased in this direction. I am a rather centrist, so I believe that, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of people are coming out as trans young people because they're free to do so. It's safe now. It's still hard. But actually, let me pull up this thing I found really interesting. This is from debate.org. It's just a general internet forum. And they asked, is becoming a transgender a fad or will it die out? 67% believe that it is a fad, right? This is not hundreds, it's only a couple dozen responses. 33% say it's not, but there is a good response from the no camp, right? And they said something that, okay, of course not. If someone gave you the choice of having a life that is easy or a life that is more difficult, I can almost guarantee that you would choose the easy one. Being trans is not a fad, and people aren't just doing it for attention. Trans people are hated and even killed just for being who they are. Many commit or attempt suicide because they can't handle how cruel the world is to them. I don't know how they could. You would have to be incredibly strong to endure that. That said, being trans will not die out. These people were born trans, and that's not going to change. While I think it is possible, and I believe that there are probably many people who are just trying to fit in, and because they have friends who are doing it, and because it's becoming popular and acceptable, they're doing it too, I do think they made a really good point. I don't think life is particularly easy for people who are trans. I think it's terrifyingly difficult. And so for me, while I mentioned some people might think, they'll be popular, maybe it is trendy, I think most people, this is just my opinion, wouldn't do that. So look, I respect the science behind this. I think it's preliminary, and I don't necessarily agree with it. But I'm willing to read more, and my opinion is always going to be based on certain facts. But when it comes to the public, I realize, I think you just got to think about the things that trans people go through, the high suicide rates. It is not an easy life, and I don't think people are doing this because their friends are doing it. I think it's possible, but I think most people are probably just feeling more comfortable expressing themselves today. But hey, comment below. The science is here. It's not definitive, it's not proven, it's preliminary, but we'll see what happens. And hopefully politics won't screw everything up, but who knows? Anyway, thanks for hanging out, and I'll have another video, guys, for you on my main channel starting tomorrow at 4, so I'll see you then.